All right, so one of my students is going through one of those sort of wall periods that Sasan talks about and has talked about in the past, right? Where they've certainly gotten to a fair level of skill, but they're kind of plateauing to a certain degree. And they know, based on sort of feedback from me, what it is they need to improve, but they're not clear on how to do it just yet. And it's obviously been the summer, and so we haven't had a ton of practices. And basically what that means is they're in the same position that most of you are, which is that you don't have me as a coach or you don't have me around coaching you. And so I wanted to make a video because I thought their question was really good. And their question basically was, how do I actually develop round vision? Because they know that round vision is really important. They know that that's kind of the next step for them. I've gone so far as to say that I think round vision in many ways is the most important skill that any debater can have as far as being successful and being high level. And so let's just go ahead and get into it. This video is going to be broken down into two parts essentially. The first part is answering the question of what is round vision? What do I mean by that? Why do I say it's the most important thing? And the second part, which might be more interesting to you if you already know what round vision is how do I recommend you develop round vision? How do you actually work on this skill? So, starting off with what is round vision? When I say round vision, what I mean is the skill set or the sort of knowledge base, whatever you want to refer to it as, to be able to understand the utility of arguments in a debate, how those arguments interact with each other, the ability to sort of see lines of argumentation and sort of where they're headed, where they're going, which ones are most accessible to you as far as increasing your likelihood of winning and things of that nature. It is vision of the round, and it's sort of this idea of a view from above. And what I mean by that is that this is sort of a Stoic philosophy principle of like taking yourself out of your life and kind of looking at it from above and like what would that be like as an impartial observer. But what I really mean in a debate context is what is the judge thinking? What does the person who, in theory, understands debate, unless you're in high school, in which case all bets are off, but if you're in college and you're being judged by a reasonable debate judge, this person who understands this round, almost certainly the entire time the debate is going on, is thinking about how the arguments in the round are likely to develop, who's going to say what, who is winning the debate at any given point. And frequently, there's an experience that I think most judges go for, or go through rather, where somewhere around the midpoint of the debate, maybe just before the final speeches, the rebuttals, or whatever you call it in your format, there's sort of this thought in their head where they go, okay, I'm voting for this team unless this team says this. And round vision is sort of the ability to, if you're that team that's losing, be able to identify what it is you need to say to win the round. And if you're the team that is winning, knowing not only what you need to say for you to sort of be ahead and have access to your arguments, but for you to know what the judge wants the other team to say and then effectively preempt that and be able to deal with it. So it's kind of complicated and it's certainly very high level. I don't think there are any bad debaters who have good round vision because if you had good round vision, you would be winning a ton of debates. It's just the case. I don't think I've ever seen someone who in a debate round I was like, wow, this person knows exactly what's going on. They understand the relevant strategies and all these things. Because the only reason you wouldn't be winning in that world, in theory, is either your partner's really awful or you have a bad dynamic, or you lack the ability to execute the strategy. But the thing about round vision is, if you're good enough at it, it's incredible because it lowers the burden of execution. It makes it really easy for you to execute because you sort of see the simplest path forward. Let's go ahead and get to how do you develop it. Number one, and this is not the fun answer, but it's the truth, the best way to develop round vision is just to be in a ton of debate rounds. And frankly, I would say it's not just being in debate rounds, but losing debate rounds or having really good judges who give really good feedback in debate rounds. I don't want to. I'm gonna single out some judges who I thought were really good judges. That does not mean that if I don't mention you, that I think you're a bad judge. It just means that I think these people give particularly good feedback, or at least that's how I felt about them when I was a competitor back in the day. So I would say that the number one judge for this when I was a competitor that I enjoyed listening to was like Kyle Cheesewright. Kyle Cheesewright was a coach at SIU forever ago, and then was the director of forensics at College of Idaho. But pretty much every time I was in front of Cheesewright, Cheesewright looked fairly disinterested and would scoff a lot, which I was super into because it was good feedback. But at the end of the debate, Cheesewright would always kind of say, like, why didn't you just do this? And I would always be like, oh, yeah, that's right. Because Cheesewright sort of had this mind for, like, this isn't as complicated as you're making it. And I thought that was, really good. Now, on kind of another end of the spectrum, instead of being like simple, I would say these days one of the best judges in the country, my students totally feel this way, I feel this way based on the ballots I get, is Adasia down at San Diego State. And Adasia writes the most phenomenal ballots and just gives tremendous feedback. But the bottom line is, when you have a judge like that in the back of the room, and when you get their feedback, you need to listen, you need to write that down, you need to engage with it, because those are the kind of rounds where, win or lose, you get better at debate. You need to have debate rounds, and crucially, you need to be able to know who is a good judge and who is a bad judge, because obviously the sort of consequence of having a bad judge is that if you think they're good, you can kind of cause yourself problems because you're listening to poor advice, which is a big part of the reason that I don't think giving people their ballots makes a whole ton of sense a lot of the time, because a lot of ballots are garbage and you kind of need a coach to filter that, especially if you're a newer student. Doing rounds. Nothing can replace this. And I think live competitive reps at competitive tournaments are the best kinds of rounds. Practice rounds are fine too. Second thing is redos. And I want to be clear, I'm trying to rank these in order of, I actually would say in this order, these things are the most important. So I think redos are the second best option after doing rounds. Redos. Why are redos the second best option, or frankly, just the best option if you're not at a tournament or if you don't have other people around? Redos are great because it takes rounds you are already in and forces you to be better, or forces you to think about it in a different way. And this drill can be done on your own with a recording or something like that, but it is especially effective if you have a friend who's a skilled debater or if you have a coach around. Dominic Lasaka, who is my good friend and former student, former teammate when I was at Pacific, this is all we did his senior year. Like, every time he came to an office hour, literally all we did was he would have a speech that he had done at a tournament or in a practice, and we would just redo it over and over and over again with me giving him notes on, okay, maybe try and go for this time, do this time, what do you want to practice on, are you going to go for this position? Because frankly, a lot of the time, the reason that this is effective and almost as good as real rounds is, in real rounds, there's this incentive towards comfort, right? Because you're nervous a lot of the time. Almost everyone's nervous unless you're a psycho. Don't know who that would be. But unless you're a psycho, you're probably a little bit scared. And what tends to happen when you're scared is you go for comfort. And that means that if you're a team that wins on T all the time, you're probably going to go for T. If you're a team that wins on cap all the time, you're probably going to go for cap. And that's not necessarily the wrong strategy, but it does sort of prevent you from developing effective round vision, because you're just doing the thing you always do. And when that's not available, it's going to be a huge, huge problem for you. Now, you can win the vast majority of debates just kind of having a wheelhouse, and especially if it's a K wheelhouse, just doing that over and over again. But eventually you're likely to hit someone who's more well-rounded, and that's going to be a problem for you. You should do redos. You should do redos where you really try and think about, did this argument matter? Did this argument not matter? Was there something else I could have gone for? Even if I was wrong, and like, let's just do the harder version of this speech. How would I win it if I had to go for this? If I hadn't done such a good job, or if my partner hadn't done such a good job, or if the other team had done a more effective job. I've mentioned this before, but this is kind of how SK Gaming, which was a Counter-Strike team from Brazil, ended up becoming the best team in the world. They're from a region where they had no good practice partners, because they're from South America or Latin America, and even North America was awful. And so what they did was, when they would practice, even against these really bad teams, they would pretend the other team was good and not take advantage of them being bad. You can do that in redos in a way that you just can't really do in a live round. Number 3 is judging rounds. And judging rounds is huge and, in many respects, irreplaceable. There is a reason why, if you judge debate at your level, you can never compete in debate again, right? Like, if you're a college debater and you judge a varsity debate round, you lose all of your eligibility, unless you're doing, like, I think just IPDA has a rule about that. Whatever, don't worry about it. Bottom line, the reason, in my mind, why you can't judge and then compete again, other than the question of conflict of interest, is because when you judge, you get way better at debate. Because what you start to see when you're a judge, even if you're judging not that high level of rounds, if you're judging novice or if you're judging junior, and especially if you get to judge, like if you're a college student, I highly recommend judging competitive high school rounds. The reason that is so effective, being in that mindset, is because you start to see all the stuff that doesn't matter. And when you're in a debate, it feels like every argument the other team makes is very scary, and they're kind of doing their job that I talk about in the member of government speech in Parley, which is they're building the wall. Their job is to build this obstacle that the MO, the second speaker on the negative, feels they have to get over. But when you're a judge, you realize that most of that wall is kind of nonsense and doesn't matter and doesn't even require responses to. And I find myself, one of the difficulties I have these days when I'm a coach and I'm in these debates against my students is that I'm kind of at a point and at a level where like I just can ignore the vast majority of what they're saying and feel like I could comfortably win the round. I'm not trying to brag or whatever, but the bottom line is like that was not how it was for me for most of my career, if not all of my career. I was kind of very much majoring in the minors, right, or not seeing the forest for the trees, as they say. Judge rounds if possible, and you can just judge all 9 rounds, videos of rounds, right? A lot of people want to flow rounds, and that's cool. That's good practice for sure. And in doing the next drill we're going to talk about is also good. But there's a big difference between sitting down for the entirety of a debate and judging the debate. And after every speech, asking yourself, who is ahead right now? What are they winning? What would the other team have to say to win? These are the things that help develop round vision, because when you were in that position, what would you do? Fourth is compressions and insertions. I've called this the Sam Cooke drill forever. I know he didn't invent it, but he's the first person to tell me about it. And I thought, I think he's the GOAT. So I call it the Sam Cooke drill. But the compressions and insertions, I've talked about this before on the How to Get Better at Debate video, which I highly recommend to anyone. This is the idea that you take any speech you've seen, right? So you watch a debate, or you have a recording of your own debate. You watch a video of a debate, and you transcribe the debate, or you flow the debate at a minimum, up until the speech that you want to practice. If you're the member of government, you flow the PMC and the LOC, right? The first 2 speeches of the debate. And then you give your version of a speech responding to that. And the first time you do it with essentially unlimited time. If the speech is normally 8 minutes, you can take 15 minutes, take 20 minutes. And then you're slowly going to reduce the time, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever, until you get to like 1 minute or 2 minutes less than the actual length of that speech. Because what that's going to happen is very quickly and very iteratively, you're going to see that a lot of the stuff you're doing doesn't matter. And you're going to start to really see which arguments do matter the most in this debate, assuming you're making a good effort at it and you're really thinking about it. Great drill, something I recommend, something that you can do alone very effectively. And then finally is writing files. I really think that it is very difficult to have good round vision if you are not good at writing files. Because writing a file, at its most basic level, is just trying to write a speech that if no one answered is good enough to win. And you'd be astounded how many people are incapable of doing that. How many files are just like self-defeating or don't really have effective offense or aren't all that useful for kind of any purpose that individuals might need them for. If you're writing good files, you're not only writing cohesive, logical, strategic files, but you're able to account for what is the other team going to read most likely. And that is really where you start to have round vision, right? Because this is round vision before the round. All of the best coaches, all of the best prep groups in the country are thinking ahead of time about what is likely to be said and how to deal with that. If you're not writing files that sort of have a trick in them or that have something that if mishandled is going to win you the debate, I think it's hard to have round vision, because that's a lot of what round vision is. It's about in the moment, in live fire, under time constraints, being able to figure out how the other team messed up or what your advantageous position is. If writing a file is an infinite amount of time to figure those things out. So if you can't do that step, it's going to be really difficult for you to do any of the other steps. Anyway, this video is already longer than I wanted it to be. That's the answer to your question, mystery student. My mouse was away, so it made that noise. Apologies. Enjoy Proteus. We're the best.